It's that perfect feeling of like tension, tension, tension. Oh gosh, okay.
Hey there, welcome to Video Connection. I'm Dan, this is Aaron, and we like to watch movies and talk about movies. And if you're here, you probably like to watch and talk about movies too. So let's get to it.
So today we're discussing Barbarian, starring Georgina Campbell and Bill Skarsgard. It is rated R, and it is currently playing in theaters. In town for a job interview, a young woman arrives at her Airbnb rental late at night, only to find that the house has been mistakenly double booked, and a strange man is already staying there. Against her better judgment, she decides to stay the night anyway, but soon discovers that there is much more to be afraid of. Now, we haven't discussed this movie with each other prior to this taping. The way it's going to work is we're both just going to give our general overview opinion,
Which may or may not match.
and then each of us will get a chance to break down specific things that we liked or disliked before we ultimately get to a recommendation.
Or a lack thereof. See, because we haven't scripted this ahead of time, it may or may not go according to plan. We might disagree about something. Aaron might spin off on a crazy rant about something that he didn't like. Or our final recommendation might have more caveats than the list of possible side effects on prescription medication. Who knows?
It might not classify as an adventure, but it will most certainly count as a conversation.
And now that our viewers' expectations are tempered accordingly, Aaron, why don't you start us off? What was your gut reaction to Barbarian?
I will tell you what, Dan, gut reaction is something I'm going to hold on to for just a second. The thing is, this is a movie that is impossible to discuss without spoiling. So pretty much this entire review is a spoiler. So if you really want to see it, you probably want to see it before you watch this video. However, I will say one thing. If you like horror movies, I'm just going to give you a simple thumbs up. You should go see this. If you don't like horror movies, you probably shouldn't go see this. Spoilers from here on out. My gut reaction was that this movie was pretty good. I guess I just want to throw in there that I feel like the marketing did an exceptional job and may have actually eclipsed the movie itself a bit, because I don't think it was quite as good as the trailer made me think it was going to be. But it was well done. It was definitely a cut above, and I enjoyed it, and I thought it was cool that I saw it in a theater. Dan, what was your gut reaction?
My reaction was very similar. I liked the movie overall. I would give it a recommendation if you're into this sort of thing. For me, this was another near miss. It's a movie that I really enjoyed, but it falls into the category of movies that I feel like could have been more if they had just managed to stick the landing.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
One of the things I really liked about it, I thought it was a great use of light and shadow, using what you can't see to scare you just as much as what you can, if not more so. I liked the initial setup with the double booking of the Airbnb. I thought it was a great, modern, simple, easy to understand way to put two people into an uncomfortable situation.
Why don't you come inside and we'll call these idiots?
I really liked the additional part of the setup with the creepy basement and the tunnels and the rooms where really bad things have clearly happened. I think that was just a great way to pull you in, get you hooked, get you wondering what's going on.
Yeah.
I also really enjoyed the prolonged tension with Keith and Tess. Kind of like Tess, the audience is never 100% sure if Keith is part of the problem. Is he in on it? Did he set the whole thing up? And until the moment that guy's head hits the wall, it's up in the air.
Totally. Actually, I want to just jump off that comment.
Okay.
Because one of the things that I thought was really interesting was all the psychology that went into that first section. Because the entire time, you're very suspicious of him, and you're very protective of her, if your heart is beating. And the thing that I kept noticing was that he was doing literally every manipulative thing I could think of to make her feel falsely comfortable and stay inside the house. And he was doing it like master level, because he wasn't being the like pushy bully guy. He was finding ways to continue to prove to her that, see, I'm not doing the creepy thing. Like, I didn't open the wine bottle. I wanted you to see me do it. Oh, I'm a gentleman. you go in the room that has a lock on the door. I'm going to stay out here. And he kept doing those things. And it was one of those where it's like, this is so black and white. You either 100% want to kill her, or you are absolutely innocent guy who is just a little bit nervous and is expressing himself awkwardly.
If he is innocent, how does he convey those same things without seeming like a creeper? It's like the impossible situation.
Right. Total catch-22. So then the thing that I was going to throw in there is that I was reading about the movie afterwards, and it turns out that the writer/director read something. I don't remember if it was a book or a pamphlet or what, but it was like a thing explaining to women red flags they should be aware of when they're with strange men. And then he wrote this scenario where a guy put every single one of those red flags up. And I was like, dude, that's exactly how I felt when I was watching it. So awesome. Like, you nailed it. And, and then from there, he ended up going into like, well, but then what if that was all wrong? And then you flip the whole thing on its head and there's like something much worse. And that's kind of where his script came from. And it was just like, that is what is so perfect. And then on top of all of this, the fact that Keith was Bill Skarsgård, because you know that 90% of the people who are watching the movie are like, but that guy's Pennywise. like you can't trust him 100%. You gotta leave a little room for like, what if he turns out to be the villain? And I was silently applauding the longer that stuff went on. Like, you are doing an exceptional job of making me go, I can't be sure one way or the other, until the point you mentioned.
And there were just enough things sprinkled in to make you think, maybe he is okay. He's with this group that she's heard of. You know, there are reasons for her to trust him. Right. But you still didn't.
The thing that I loved about that connection with the documentary and jazz and stuff, was it jazz or was it blues? It was jazz, wasn't it?
I think it was jazz.
But the thing that I loved about that connection is it was one of those things that was like, well, if he's a stalker, of course he knew that stuff about her and made up this story about how he was a guy, and he was so smart about it. Oh, I'm not the guy, but I'm like one of the guys. Like, he's even, literally everything he was doing was how you gently dance around stuff when you're lying to make it seem like you're telling the truth. And lo and behold, it appears he was telling the truth about everything.
Poor guy.
Yeah. That sucked.
I agree with everything you just said. What else did you like about it?
I like that I thought the camera had a lot of personality, because sometimes, a movie like this, it can overdo it and sometimes it can be really flat. But there were, a couple of those like really cool push zooms sort of things they did where it would like when the key wasn't there and they moved the camera in, and, little things like how they focused on the lock. When she would lock the door, there would always be a close up click. And I loved how that paid off, because they showed her do that, I think, 3 different times. And then when they're all happy and they have their wine and they're friends and everything's cool, she goes in her room, she shuts the door, no close-up, no click. And it was like, I hope everyone picked up on that, because they just did it flawlessly. Like, why didn't you lock the door? So this is super nitpicky, but they made such a big deal about her locking the door, which I liked. But the funny part was that I had noticed before they ever got to that she didn't lock her car. And then there was at least one other instance of it, if not 2, where she doesn't lock her car. Now, maybe she did, but they just didn't show it. But it was one of those things where it was like, so important to have locked doors, and this is a terrifying neighborhood, and you don't know where you are, and she doesn't lock her car. And that was one of those things that killed me, because it was like I'm sure she would be that conscientious, and you didn't. Man, that drove me nuts. And then, to emphasize it, Justin Long. Boop, boop. He totally locked his car, because of course he did, because he's pretentious enough that he's going to care very much about the stuff in his rental. So, nitpick.
But a valid one.
I like the way it was edited, because they did some neat stuff here and there. They did more than one like nice passage of time cuts where something's happening in tension's building and the lights are on, it's morning, I'm waking up. And I love transitions like that are just very like impactful. It doesn't feel like a rug pull. It just feels like a dramatic shift, I guess.
And those dramatic shifts can be doubly impactful in a movie like this, when you're uneasy and then that sunlight in the morning just feels like comfort.
Exactly. And then it's that perfect feeling of like tension. Oh gosh, okay, he's alive, it's sunlight, we're okay, we're gonna be okay for a few more minutes. Another thing in terms of just like the physical space, I loved how they used great camera coverage to show you that, like, walk down the hall and there's the door at the end, and then it goes down the stairs, and then you go that way and here's the door, and then that's the long way, and they built sort of visual map for you to understand exactly what it's like to walk in the front door and go all the way down to the worst parts of the lair. And by repeating it, like, it didn't feel boring in any way, but it was just like I totally get it. And like, there was the point in the middle when she jumps out of that pit, and I understand exactly how far she has to get and what has to happen. And I know the second that she sees stairs, it's like, dude, you're halfway there. Like, just get up the stairs. You're so, And sometimes in movies, I feel like they don't make the effort to communicate those things. So you just sort of accept the hero's in danger. The hero's running. Oh, the hero's out of the clearing. And then that's as much as information as you needed. But in this case, I felt like they were very specific about, like, I want you to understand, like, if you can get out this doorway, this is how much further you have to get away. Yeah,
that's a great point. Viewers could probably draw a map of this house. If you were to go to that house, you would know your way down the basement. And also, the fact that you're building this mental map makes it more effective. The fact that the tunnels, it's not just a basement that's nicely laid out under the house. It's like, this doesn't make sense. These tunnels go off forever. Like, it's more creepy that these tunnels are going off under other people's property, like way beyond the confines of, the property line for that house.
Which was, one of the fun things that I was thinking about when the movie was playing was like, what the heck did this guy do? How much was he taking advantage of the neighborhood falling apart and people selling and moving out and all that sort of thing? Which another small detail, like, just from storytelling perspective, I loved it when she comes out the first day in the morning and steps outside, and it's like, oh man, this is like a nightmare. I had no idea that it was this trashy. That was awesome.
Right. And I think that was a kind of a recurring theme was, you would see things in the dark, and then they would show you again in the light. And surprisingly, seeing it in the light isn't necessarily less scary as you expected it would be. It's like, oh, this is actually maybe worse now that I can see the detail around.
For sure.
Another thing that I liked sort of on that same topic is the fact that his house was left relatively untouched while everything else wasn't. Just sort of like speaks to the fact that as other people are messing with these other houses and they're falling into disrepair, nobody was going to mess with that house because the people who were in that neighborhood are afraid of that house and who is inside.
When those kids come to like tag this thing and smash those windows, and don't touch that house. So another thing that I really liked about this movie was that I think Justin Long totally crushed it. Like, he is somebody who I feel like is a character actor that tends to evoke a certain kind of a character. Like, he tends to be somebody who's like a little bit more naive or something like that. And it was literally his first scene in the car ride that he was in that he convinced me that he is this guy and he is not the Justin Long I'm thinking of. And then it just continued through the rest of the movie.
Yeah, he really did a great job just being the absolute sleazeball.
Good job, buddy.
And another thing that I really liked about the way they set his character up that way is that at that moment, if Tess is alive, you know she needs someone to come and save her. And you also know very quickly by the time that he's getting off the plane in Detroit, he is not that guy. This is not the hero coming to save the day.
Nope.
This is like least possible hero you could have coming to try to help you.
Yeah. The strong switch from cutting away from Keith getting murdered to like the beach in Malibu and he's driving, like in my head, Tess is dead. I would totally believe that she did not make it because that was such a hard transition.
I still had hopes that she was alive, but I didn't know how much time had passed, until he got there. That was actually a nice way to show how much time had passed by having him on the phone asking when the last time it was rented and them saying the maid only comes before it gets rented. That was a couple weeks ago. So, Tess has been there for a while by the time you see her. And she looks it.
Yep. Related to that, something that I thought was interesting is very stereotypical horror trope is you use your opening scene to introduce your scare. You don't really show it. It rips someone in half and you get to see them splattered all over something, but you don't really see the thing. And then that's your fun setup. And then cut to sunshine and rainbows. Everything is fine. And occasionally it'll be like 2 days earlier or whatever.
Sure.
They didn't do that. I think that moment was that trope drawn out to almost halfway through the movie of the cut to black Malibu, and I liked it very much because it felt like I didn't necessarily think that in the moment, but I liked it because it just was like this okay, and I just
who's this guy now?
Right, and it's funny because I feel like that's the sort of thing that you do in a movie, and you do it wrong, everybody just shuts down and you want to walk out of the theater. But instead I was just like, they're probably dead. All right, who's this guy? Why are we watching him? So, I thought that worked.
So as I said at the beginning, even though I liked the movie, I felt like it was a near miss. And so I have to talk about where I feel like it came up slightly short. One of the things is I felt like the end wasn't quite as scary as what came before it. And I feel like part of that is bringing the mother out of the house. As we talked about earlier, one of the things that they've done in this movie a couple times is showing you something that was in the dark in the light, and it's still just as scary. This is a case where I felt like it didn't have that same effect. So you're bringing the mother out of the house. You are both literally shining more light on her, but also figuratively with, the helpful neighborhood guy that's giving you the exposition. You're figuratively seeing more of the shape of her. And in doing so, I feel like you have rendered her less terrifying than she was before. And so I feel like that's just a little bit of a missed opportunity, especially as someone, I generally lean towards wanting things to have like a logical explanation. But in this case, I feel like they could have let the audience connect the dots with the things that they showed us in flashbacks. You've basically figured out what she is and why she's there without having, a helpful explanation, detailing, exactly what the situation is. I feel like knowing in concrete terms and seeing her in concrete terms sort of cut the legs out a little bit of the fear factor in the last scenes.
I feel like a lot of times I'm on the same page about wanting things to be logical, and so I'll watch a movie where things are ambiguous, and my criticism would be like, that was ambiguous. I wanted to know for sure. Why was the thing? This is such a great example of, sometimes ambiguous, lets your imagination build it up bigger. Because I agree that I liked how there wasn't really a supernatural element. It was grounded. Unfortunately, in the real world, even a genetically messed up person who's the result of generations of incest or whatever it might have been is just a person. They're frightening to look at and apparently super strong, which is weird, but can be killed and aren't, that big of a threat once you...
That brings up another interesting point that I feel we have to talk about, which is the freakish superhuman strength and difficulty killing. And I know that it is a tried and true, horror movie, well-trodden road to have the very hard to kill antagonist. But in this case, there is no supernatural explanation. She's just a human, and yet has, seemingly superhuman strength. She can be hit by a car, seemingly no worse for the wear, no broken bones, and even diving headfirst off of a 100-foot drop onto concrete, and despite having a little bit of blood, still gets up and seems basically fully intact.
Yep.
I don't know.
You can come up with some dumb X-Men Marvel type explanation for why she's super anything, but it doesn't really fit in the story. Another thing I do want to mention, I don't know what your experience was in the theater, but there were multiple points in the big finale section specifically, I think, where there were people laughing in the theater, and I don't think there were points where you really were supposed to be laughing.
There was one point when the scene of the mother leaping off of the tower.
That was number one on the list.
There was a guy in my row who laughed out loud, and I gotta say, I wasn't that far behind him. I didn't laugh, but
yep.
As what we're talking about, it was kind of cutting a little bit of the horror element out.
Well, and it's so funny because, hindsight's 20/20, and it's so easy to be a critic, but it was one of those things that I was watching, and even in the moment, I feel like, how much better would that have been if the camera was up on top of the water tower and she just disappeared over the edge, so that we were watching it from Justin Long's perspective, and it was just whew, and then you get a couple seconds of that silence and then a meat crunching thud. That would have been like what happened?
Sure.
And instead it was like it was this ridiculous It was just like the Superman dive. It was so goofy that the only way it's excusable is if the director wanted it to be as goofy as it looked. And I'm not sure that's what he was trying to do. So yeah, that was a bit much.
It was a bit of a tonal shift. I felt like the first part had such a great, horror tone to it. And the ending, the third act, just went a little bit off the rails, got a little hokey. I still enjoyed the movie. Mm-hmm. But, there's just something lost there.
This is a little granular, but I wanted to say it anyway. Related to the camera stuff, the editing, and all those sorts of things, the first half or so of the movie utilized close-ups a lot more, which I noticed, and I thought was cool because it made it feel more claustrophobic. And then when it got to the scarier parts, it was really claustrophobic. If you saw that shot of her jumping off from up there and she disappears, and then you could even cut before the impact to another close-up where there's a bunch of blades of grass that are out of focus in the front, and you just see a fleshy mass go like that would have been scary and unsettling in the tension of the moment, and instead we got the goofy thing that happened. So just yet another one. It was like, it's a small decision, but that might have actually made a really big, rather than a tonal shift, that would have kept a tone that felt more intimidating.
And the only other thing that I had that was sort of a knock, not necessarily a knock, but a little bit of a knock against it, was the fact that by the end, even before the end, at least in my opinion, the mother has become a sympathetic character. She stops being the monster. Once you know the whole story, she's basically another victim of the guy in the basement. So you stop seeing her as a monster. You start to see all of the mother's actions up to that point have been attempting to be a nurturing mother. She might lose her cool. She might have no emotional maturity. Obviously, she doesn't have, the full breadth of emotional intelligence. But basically, she is another victim in this and is just trying to do right.
Mm-hmm. I agree that it was this completely sympathetic character.
And I'm not saying that's even a bad thing to do. It's just that, it's hard to keep it being scary at that point. Because now she's a very strong but very tragic figure instead of, a typical horror villain.
One other little thing. They kept zooming in on that snake charm in her car that was hanging from her rearview window.
I did notice that.
And I wanted to be the philosophical guy that understood the symbolism, and all I could think was, snake? ? That's as far as I got.
I'm with you. I noticed it, and I feel like there's something I was supposed to know, and I didn't, and I wondered if it was going to be addressed, and it wasn't. So, snake? ?
Like, I didn't know if it was just a red herring. Garden of Eden. Snakes, dishonesty, lying. Because there was the part of me that was like, oh, is she going to turn out to be the bad guy all along some weird way? And no, that doesn't make any sense at all. Was it one of those deep cut things that some guys who've read a certain book will be able to understand what they meant, and I'm just not one of those people, so I don't get it.
We're not those people. Sorry.
I'm almost more comfortable now that Dan didn't understand it either.
After this, we'll Google that, and it's going to be something super obvious that we're going to feel so dumb for not knowing. We're sorry we didn't know, okay? So I have to mention one other thing. We were talking about her superhuman abilities, not really having an explanation. And I have to mention, she ran through a concrete wall.
Yeah, that was a total Incredible Hulk moment. That was just like, come on, she can't do that. But then the funny part for me is I thought that was the most cliche thing that happened in the entire movie, because it's such the typical thing to have the, character who's on the diatribe and then the thing comes in and gets them. And I knew that guy wasn't going to finish his sentence. And lo and behold, at almost exactly the moment I would have predicted, she smashed through the wall.
The only unexpected thing was, you think the window up over his shoulder is where she's about to dive through, and then she comes through the wall instead. But at the same time, she's just a lady. How did she do that? And then rip his arm up. So, all that to say, I still liked the movie. I would still generally give it a recommendation, especially if you're a fan of horror movies in general. If you're my mom, don't go see it. You're not going to like it.
There's a very distinct reason why I did not bring my wife to this one. I also thought that this was a pretty good horror movie. I think that, they shot it really nicely. It was claustrophobic. They did a lot of things right. It was very artistic, and I appreciated it. The cast did a great job. It just didn't quite go as far as it could have.
Yeah, I would say even though it wasn't a perfect film, I don't know if it'll go down as a classic, but it's a pretty fun ride.
It's just so much better than so many other options you have when it comes to horror movies, and I feel like that's worth something.
So if you like horror, go see it.
Yeah.
If you don't
watch it if you don't like horror movies.
No.